How you doing? Making another video here. My wife has a Q5 2011 Audi Q5. It's got multiple misfires. Yesterday I did bank 2. It's a 3.2 liter FSI engine. So found a lot of oil on the plugs, a lot of oil in the coils themselves, and I believe that's causing her a lot of issues with the way it's running. I suspected that was the case through diagnosing it. So you can see that's a brand new valve cover, new gasket, new plugs, new points. On this side, this is the side we're going to be doing today by the coolant reservoir. So let's get started and see where we go from here. So the first thing we're going to do is move the coolant reservoir. The easiest way to do this, of course, pop this little clip up. Pull the hose off. Sorry, trying to do this with my camera. So you're popping this clip up. Once it's up and out of the way, hose pops off. I always pop the clip back down for later. These are plastic lines. They can be brittle, so be careful with them. Next thing we're going to do is back here. These two nuts, 10 millimeter, we're going to pop those off. Okay, I took the nuts off. They're up there. I'm going to clean them up then. She had a coolant leak at one point in time, so got to do some cleaning in here. Which down here, there's a lot of cleaning to do. I suspect this is the side that was really leaking. The other side wasn't as bad, but it turns out that side was leaking by the back corner. At the last valve cover gasket bolt, which someone was in there before, and I don't believe they tightened it down very well. So, you know, I'm not gonna remove the oil cap until a little bit later because I don't want anything falling down inside the engine. But the next steps we have to do is move this coolant reservoir. We have to pull that breather hose off the back, and then we're gonna undo the wiring harness screws, pull them down and off and away, try and free up some space, pull out the coils, remove the plugs, start working on pulling off the valve cover gasket. At that time I'll probably pull off the oil cap because the next step is going to be pulling the cover off, cleaning up the gasket surface, and cleaning up, I'm sure, a lot of oil down inside where the actual cylinders get fired by spark. So moving on. Okay, down here at the bottom, you see there's a coolant sensor. Right down here. You're going to want to remove that to move this out of the way. The only other thing connecting this is that hose at the bottom, but that's the main feed for the coolant reservoir. So I don't want to disconnect that because I have to drain the whole coolant system then. So I'm just going to try and pull this up and maneuver it and position it out of the way so that I can get a little bit better access to the valve cover back behind there. Okay. Here. So you ready? Okay. So breather hose has to come off. These are always brittle, so be careful. You basically want to try and shimmy up one side at a time. And there we go. So again, be careful with those, they are brittle. Pause. Alright, next we're going to take off the actual coil harness. It's a T15, Torx 15. Do not drop the bolts. Once you have that off, carefully push back on these clips and separate each one of the coil harness. Again, the plastic's brittle, so do be careful. Okay, that one's loose. That one's loose. And that one's loose. So pull those down and away. And like I said, they are brittle. One did break on me. Cylinder number 1. So you can see back here, cylinder number 3. A lot of coolant got on that sensor, so I'm going to clean that up real good. But you can see the amount of oil on the valve cover down and around it. This has been the one that I've been fearing has been leaking the most. So wiggle out the coils. Moment of truth. I can tell from how juicy this is, there's going to be oil in these. You can see the oil on there, down inside. Try and get you a good angle of this. Oil down inside as well. That was cylinder number 2. Just wiggle and pull. They'll come. Cylinder number 1, covered in oil. Down inside the hole. Yep, just as bad as 2. Cylinder number 3, which is the one I think will be the worst, because it seems like the leak's coming from back there. And of course, the least amount of room to work with. And we have a little bit of oil. Actually, looks like cylinder number 2 might be the worst. There seems to be the most oil down in that one. But next thing is to get the spark plugs out of there. So 5/8 spark plug socket, decent size extension, and a ratchet Be careful always with spark plugs when you're taking them in and taking them out. Always start them by hand and get a few turns softly before you start to really go at it, so that you don't end up stripping out the socket threads, because that's a whole nother nightmare. All right, and you can see the oil all over that socket and the black carbon that is formed up on top here. Now the proper gapping is 0.036 for these spark plugs. I bought new iridium plugs. Yes, they're supposed to be platinum, but they sent with the coils the iridium plugs, and that's just an upgrade. Sorry, the rain just picked up like crazy here. That's just an upgraded plug. Just make sure your gap's the same. A lot of people say gapping doesn't matter, but sporadic gapping can matter if you have one gapped more than another. So always just check with a spark plug gapper to make sure that you're close. Notice these came in at 0.040, and I've been bending them down to 0.036 individually as I put them back in, because I believe that, especially on an Audi, that the little things matter. So there's the first one. We're going to take out the other two. This one's really oily. Okay, so you can see on this one, very oily. This is cylinder number 2. Again, actually not as black up top there, but just coated in oil. So this is what's been causing her misfires. Obviously, it can't get sparked through oil. So sporadically, these cylinders have been throwing misfires passively and sporadically, which just basically makes the car run like shit. So we're going to fix that right now. Cylinder 1, not as oily. Some oil on it, but not quite as bad as 2. And 3 was the best one of them all. So surprisingly, I thought 3 would be the worst, but 2 was definitely the worst. So the seal on the gasket up around the top of the spark plug cavity is obviously where they're leaking. So we're going to make sure to seal that really well. Alright, so T25, Torx 25. You want to loosen up the valve cover bolts. They're captive with rubber grommets. Still be careful not to drop any out. Obviously, if you're using an impact like I am, be very careful when backing it out to not strip it out. Start slow. Pause it.
Ready.
Alright, so as you can see, this back one, there's no clearance at all. It's very difficult on both sides. So, setting up a wobble, it's hard to get in there, but you want to get as straight as possible. They are only torqued down to 7 foot-pounds, so, or 7 newton meters. So, they free up very easily, and they're very lubricated, obviously, with all the oil. So, just keep working at it until you can back it all the way out. Alright, all the bolts are loosened, so now we just want to gently lift up on the valve cover itself. Take the oil cap off. Put it somewhere safe until you need it again. And if you have any bolts that are still holding like I do, just finesse them until they're all out. Okay, success. The old one's off. You can see the leak area down in here. All the oil down along the bottom there. That is all, that was the whole edge was leaking. So I always like to take the minute to make sure that everything is firm and nothing's rattling and stuck. Everything seems to be in good shape over here. I'm gonna get rid of this old one before I do. That's the underside of it. Crap. Obviously the bolt grommets weren't holding anymore, but you can see very, very bad. It's wet around the top a little bit at the bottom edge, mainly right around the oil cap in this corner and all along the bottom. So those are the areas we're going to want to make sure to seal. Hold on one second. We have a new one. Gasket's already in place. I'm going to be very careful. This is a seated gasket, so I'm going to just keep it seated and do the sealing on the gasket surface. While you're not in the engine, just make sure to cover the engine internals so that nothing gets down in there. But we'll be putting this new one on after we get everything prepared. Alright, to get down inside there, got basically some parts cleaner. Spray the rag down real good. To get down inside where all that oil was, I'm going to go down. I just have this extension that I use for my driver, just because it's a little bit less of a coarse tool. It's a finer tip, so I can get down in there really good. I'm going to double wrap the rag and just get down straight in all the way to the bottom and then wiggle around so the tip of that is kind of making a circle on the bottom. Spend some time so you can kind of scrub it, but at the same time absorb everything down there. And then I always go in and out a few times. You can see a piece of the gasket right there came out with it. And I'm gonna have to go for a second dive here. The upper portion still has some oil up there. You can see all the oil that came out on the tip. I'm going to go down one more time. This time I'm going to take a clean section of the rag. Again, the rest of the oil. And now she's looking pretty clean down in there. Try and get some light. See down in there? Compared to down in there.
Do you need more rags?
Probably. Oh my God, this one's bad. Another piece of the gasket in here.
How does it get down in there?
Breaks off.
Where's this rod you were talking about?
These are lifters.
Oh.
One for intake, one for exhaust. These are your camshafts.
Mm-hmm.
These are your camshaft bushings. Very, very thoroughly the gasket mating surface. So I'm scraping it down. I've already gone around it, cleaned all the oil off.
Stop.
Isn't that better? Hang on. Try that.
Better.
Pay attention where all the bolts go to make sure there's nothing on there. There's a little oil leaking there yet. And get that with a rag. And these areas back here that we had leaks. Corner. Alright, let me get the rest of this with a rag. Okay.
Ready.
So I got the 90-minute gasket maker. It's a dark gray, they say black, but has this nozzle to apply. And last night my wife gave me the wonderful idea of sticking paper clips down in it so that the whole shaft had something go through it. So I stuck 2 paper clips and locked them off on either end. And when I pulled it out today, it took all the gasket from inside there out in one piece. So now I got a clear tube and I'm ready to use it again. So 90-minute gasket maker. There's the part number, 25228. You can use whatever you like, but this is the one that I like because it sets fast, but it gives a good bond. So we're going to go seal everywhere around where the gasket's going to go. Try and get as much of a constant bead as possible, but don't get it into the engine. I'm going to apply pretty liberally back here, because this, if you remember, was one of our danger zones for the leaks. Alright, I'm going to pause it now, come back to this after everything has been sealed, so you can see one last time before I put the new cover back on. So that's all the sealer on there now. I went really heavy across the bottom because of the fact that across the bottom is where it was leaking before. Okay, so now, very important, we're going to put the valve cover gasket back on. The new one. All our bolts are there except for one. Why are we missing one? Alright, found our missing bolt. So when you're putting this on, again, I'm being careful not to touch the gasket underneath, but I do want to make sure that it is fully seated everywhere. And we look good. So when putting this on, try not to go at an angle and push and all that. I'm going to try and get down on it as straight as possible. So that you get a nice even seat. All right. So I usually put the oil cap back on just because, again, not getting anything down inside there. It's going to give the oil cap a little cleanup because, like everything else over here, it's covered with oil. Okay. So now that we're at this point, I'm going to hand tighten everything down gently. You do not want to crank these things down and press out that gasket. And then I go around and look one last time to make sure that I'm fully seated. So I'm just using this extension here, like a screwdriver, to get it started and hand tighten it down. You want to start from the inside and work your way to the outside. Again, like I said, the sequence is kind of important to get that gasket to seat fully. Start from the inside and then move your way to the outside. Hand tighten for now. We'll come back and torque them down in a little bit. Okay, next we're going to put the torque down all the bolts all the way around in the pattern that I talked about. Again, they're torqued down at 7 Newton meters. They don't have to be on tight. You don't want to over compress the gasket. And oil caps back on. Cover gaskets on. We're in good business there. Next thing we're going to be doing is the plugs. I'm going to be checking all the gapping. If you want to come over with me real quick, we'll check one plug gap. So, a lot of people in the forums, things like that, say that gapping your plugs doesn't really matter, but having the same gap all the way around is important. So as you can see, these came really big. If you can see that, it's over 0.040, it's about 0.43, and that is too big. So just going to give that a little bit of a closure. About 0.38 right now. And right there. About 0.37, 0.36. 0.38 is the actual spec. And if you can see, I'm right on 0.38 now at this point. So this plug's ready to go in. Alright, all the spark plugs are in. I torqued them down to 22 foot-pounds. Made sure the gaps were all 0.038. Trying to get light down there. There you go. You see them down in there. Now we're going to put the coils on. TRQ coils. And we're getting done with this job here shortly. So you want to just push them in, seat them fully down until they pop. You got to get these harnesses out of the way, which is a bit of a problem because there doesn't seem to be enough space. Alright, let's try this a different way. Hold on. Alright, that one's on. Now we got that one. Last one. And make sure it's all the way down. And then we're going to go back through and we're going to line up our harnesses and slide them back up till they click. And then the little screws that hold it down, I just hand tighten them. There's actually a torque spec of 5 Newton meters, but that's just silly. Basically just don't crank on them too much to break the plastic. Again, this is the T15 Torx. Okay. Alright, so that job is done. Important parts are breather hoses back on. You have your coils fully seated. Your harness is fully up and seated and clipped. And then you tighten these retaining bolts down so it stays in place. So the next thing we got to do is put the coolant reservoir back. So I have my coolant sensor over here. I'm going to go ahead and clip that back onto the bottom until it clicks. Bring the coolant reservoir back around, overflow, sit it down on its nuts there, and there's a little grommet that seats down at the bottom so that you're in fully. So make sure you get that grommet. You can see it down there at the bottom. That grommet goes into a hole and seats your reservoir completely. Take the 10mm nuts, start them, hand thread them. And then I'm going to take my impact 10mm socket. And now that that's done, one last step is put our overflow vent line back on. If you remember, pop the little clip up. Slide it in place, pop the little clip back down, and it's snugging on. And that's it. So I'm gonna take these tools down and we're gonna go give it a start. I am gonna go clear the codes. I'm gonna start it without clearing the codes the first time, just to hear if I have a better sequence. start up. But then I'm gonna hook it up to a scanner and clear the codes, which obviously you all know how to do. So good luck with it. Hope this video helps somebody out there, and have a great time with your Audi. They're great cars. They just need your love a lot.